Welcome to reInvent. My name is Rob Nolan. I'm a senior enterprise technologist and a director in our Department of Defense business here at AWS. This is my third year doing a panel like this, helping our customers in the Department of Defense talk a little bit about how the cloud's enabling their journey. Appreciate you all coming today. So we've got a great panel of folks here. Let's see, there we go. So that's who we got. We'll go ahead and let them go through some introductions. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things. Appreciate you all coming today. We're going to have a good conversation going back and forth here, and looking forward to a good discussion. So without further delay, Leo.
All right, well, thanks for coming. I appreciate it. I'll be short because I want to get to the meat of this discussion. I'm Leo Garcia, and I'm the Army Chief Information Officer.
I'm Michael Majesti. I'm the Air Force Intelligence Chief Information Officer.
Daryl Roberts, Defense Logistics Agency CIO. The Air Force, the Army, just a little quick background about DLA. We're the Logistics Combat Support Agency, meaning anything logistically needed by the warfighter, we provide for DLA, everything from repair parts, food, clothing, uniform, things of that nature.
And Justin Finelli, CTO for Department of Navy, so Navy and Marine Corps, and then Tech Director for PEO Digital, that's acquisition. If you're here with us, then you're in the fight. Thanks for being here.
Awesome. So we're here today to talk about how the armed forces are looking to connect data across domains. So there's a term that's used a lot when we talk about digital modernization with the DoD. It's called decision advantage, decision superiority, something like that. And that's basically giving the ability for our armed forces to make the decision that helps them have the advantage. That way, they're able to come out of that, have an outcome that is a successful one, right? And so with the advances in technology, both cyber technology, how the world is starting to evolve, information is the key asset in a lot of ways to help enable armed forces around the world, not just the United States, deter war in a lot of cases. So we're going to talk a little bit about data today. We're going to talk about how data is going to influence artificial intelligence and how the armed forces are using those in their digital transformation journey. But so yeah, it's just going to be a conversation. We're going to go through some stuff and see where we get. So I guess first question to you guys, and we'll start with you, Leo, and we just walk our way down the panel here. A lot of times you'll hear in conferences and marketing that data is a strategic asset, right? And so what does that mean to you? Do you agree with that, or do you think that's the case, or how is the Army viewing data in terms of its strategic import?
How to not be buzzword compliant right now? Definitely data is a strategic asset. I think from an Army perspective right now, our focus has really been on just getting the basics right. I think we've moved into this space very quickly from a very, what I would say, decentralized kind of approach, right? Pockets of functional folks and business units kind of doing their own thing. And really, what does that mean, and how do we operationalize that? The last 3 years, the Army's really been on a journey to just focus on operationalizing the data we have, right? And what does that mean? I think people forget all the time. They're like, well, the Army, right? Well, how big is the Army? So the Army's got Walmart. We got our own hospitals. We got our own logistics folks. We got every possible functional area you can ever imagine rolled into one big 1.3 million strong kind of force. That's a lot of different data sets and a lot of functional responsibility. So we've really been focused on this very foundational level of how do you build governance into that? How do you get the right folks responsible? And how do you start thinking about where can we best operationalize the data sets we have? And how do we crosswalk that across warfighting functions, functional areas I need to do, right? Got to work on contracts, it's a thing, right? How do we get all those folks thinking about data the same way? And the other piece of that is building a core of data literate folks across the workforce. And that's the part that a lot of organizations forget to do. We really focus on bottoms up, right? Whether it be institutional training that we have within service, or it be just working with universities, working with some folks in private industry to really get that core stood up inside the Army across the board with some data literacy that really helps us move to that next step, which is, I think, the very beginning part of how do you operationalize this data across all the Army's mission.
So yeah, I agree. Data is a strategic asset, but I think that we're also looking at it a different way. The analogy starts to break down when you start measuring data as an asset vice a product. So when you measure your success in an asset situation, It's really how much of it do I have? I could be like Scrooge McDuck swimming through my assets, right? It's not really about the volume. It's about really how many people care that you have it. Is it usable, and how in demand is that? And so if you think about it, not as like refined Intel products, but as a product that is bringing some value, then I can measure success by the amount of times that data is actually being accessed. How many people care that I actually have that data? And am I making it in a accessible format that's secure but able to be used when needed, where needed? And so then the technology solutions and the mindsets shift so that the motivations of the various programs that have this data are now being rewarded by measuring how much they're sharing it and not how much they just have. And because we really need to change the contracts and the mindsets so that it's not all about just the people you're on contract for, but it's all about who else could potentially use this data for things I don't even know how they could, but I need to also make it available. And so data as a product tends to have an analogy that works better from an aspect of how do I measure success and how do I deal with data in a meaningful way where I can support and focus on areas that are getting more value out of that data.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both of your comments, and definitely it's a strategic asset for DLA. As I stated before, we do logistics for the department, for a whole of government. So while we need to understand our own internal data, I'm very dependent on the gentleman on this stage because we, from an interoperability perspective, supporting the Army, supporting the Air Force, supporting the Navy, Space Force, Marine Corps, we not only need to understand our data, we need to understand the DoD data, as well as those as NATO and our foreign partners. And so I think one of the things you'll see as a common theme for us here when we talk about data as a strategic asset, the Department of Defense is here for one reason only, right? That's deterrence and, if need be, conflict. And so we're really looking at data as a strategic asset because we don't want to go to conflict. And so how do we use that data in an operable cross-domain fashion to be a stronger deterrent in this world? And so we focus on data literacy, data acumen, not just at the strategic level where folks like us look at data scientists, data analysts, but I think data literacy, data acumen becomes a strategic asset when folks on the front line, right, that E1, the soldier, the airman, the Marine, they understand everything they do each day provides some type of data that will be used for analysis, right? Not to say how did we do, but what should we do? How should we do it? What factors should we consider? So that's how we look at data from a strategic perspective at DLA.
And I'd say you measure a strategy in time by your results. We have been saying, I went back and looked, since at least 2016 that data is a strategic asset. I think you measure us based on whether we're taking that seriously. And so the speed to the OODA loop is a question. I'd say in my 25 years in and around military and IC, the Ukraine conflict and the Red Sea have gotten more people who aren't in CIO shops and are tip of the spear caring about data. So that is a pivotal shift in how we operate. I think we've always cared about data. It's always been a strategic asset, but if it's not moving the needle beyond data knowledgeable people and technical people like those in the room, then it's more words than data. And so I would say that like measuring and how we measure our speed and do that translation will dictate ultimately its success as a strategic capability. And so Mike mentioned, hey, we can count things, input, weakest way to measure. We can count outputs in terms of like, here are the products, or outcomes. And so where we show that data has provided us more operational resilience or more adaptability, and these are not linear things, these are power laws. That's where we need your help so that you can say, we're not 10% better, that's industrial grade improvement. We are 200% better, we are 700% better. Data is allowing us to do that where we show it in like the labby things, where we're doing that in production. It's a lasting change that we don't have to come back from if we can prove that, tell that story.
And I think the shift in the world and the shift in how everything is kind of shaping up, right? Like the focus from one area of responsibility for you guys right now, where that was primarily the focus for a long time, led to a lot of efficiencies in doing that. But now that we have to look all around the world, we have to look at near peer, situations, things of that nature. Decision advantage becomes even more powerful because we have people that can compete with us in areas that maybe we haven't been, focused on in a long time.
I think something to think about too, and we all kind of touched on it, is 4 or 5 years ago, I think we were all in a very different place, and just the hard push to really get the workforce trained and build that acumen has really helped us. Where before it would have been Ukraine situation, we'll hand that over to some Intel folks or some ORSA folks. Now it's like you have commanders are like, no, I understand this, right? I'm going to move out. I'm going to get my team here of folks who are functional experts, and we're going to move out operationally. So the environment really has changed in the last couple of years.
All right, so really quick, this is a slide that we put together a long time ago. I'm going to buzzword it again. Sorry, man. When we started talking about something called JADC2, right? And JADC2 is a conceptual idea that is about the unification of command and control. And one of the big things that is a big part of that is how we're going to drive data through it, right? So if you look at the cloud as this kind of substrate to move information, right? This is one vision of how we see, like, you could actually create that life cycle of information, right? So you gather that raw data, those assets, you put them through some sort of a catalog, processing, data lake, you provide access to that information, to whoever should be authorized to get it. Then you have your machine learning, your AI, you have your analytics for your ad hoc queries or your decision inputs, things of that nature, and then the applications that consume that information. And then you create this virtuous cycle that then feeds all that back in to then continuously improve and iterate. So we look at this in the cloud as this conceptual thing, and we see, you're going to hear all week from commercial customers, from other folks like that who are building these kind of systems. But we have some unique challenges, I think, when it comes to the types of information that we process. And so we're going to talk a little bit about infrastructure and cloud technologies. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go through certain areas that we have to think about that maybe, like some folks in the commercial world, they either take for granted or they don't necessarily pay as much attention to, but are key to mission success, mission security, and national security. So I'll ask maybe Mike, if you could start. What are some of the things we're doing with cloud technologies to kind of help support these data strategies and the augmenting of data as a decision aid? And anywhere you want here on, maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the, I think you're hot, you should just be hot. Anywhere you want to talk about how the Air Force IC Enterprise is kind of building these things to help mission owners move quicker.
Okay, yeah, so infrastructure standards, obviously very important. You want to move fast, and you do that by deduplicating efforts and doing them once and scaling them out. And so we can inherit a lot of work that's already been done once. And so by figuring out what are these design patterns that we want to be able to kind of move people in towards that sound like they're going to be the best fit for their situation, knowing that sometimes there's always one-offs that we have to deal with, and we shouldn't be too far on that pendulum where we force everything into a design pattern. But for the most part, we should be able to get the capability to move faster and help people by getting infrastructure design patterns. For example, we have a program that will come to us and say, I want to be able to have some Lambda serverless functions work with my containerized web front end, and then I'm going to call Amazon RDS managed service, integrated that with maybe I have some IaaS VPC that's running a portion of that solution, right? So now I have to make all that work together. In our environment, we have a challenge where our air-gapped classified networks and cloud environments don't necessarily have all the options that you have on the commercial side and then the unclassed side. So we have to go through a process to accredit those. So we actually artificially limit our customers to be able to keep them in parity, because a lot of times they want to be able to deploy all three, and we can do that very seamlessly with code, pass through another key part of all of this, which are cross-domain solutions for those air-gapped classified environments. So if we can keep them artificially limited, we don't have to fork the code, you don't have to do bespoke solutions at every classification. At the same time, you are kind of being held back from what the latest and greatest is. But it is very key that everyone understands that if I do use this design pattern that we are telling you is one that you should try to fit into, they can move forward faster than being a unique one-off. And so from a data perspective, we can do a lot with very simple things. You know, an elk stack is pretty powerful. And you add to it some Kafka streams, you add to it a spiral development for every use case, and pretty soon you've got an actual data platform that's pretty capable. And we were able to do that with what was already accredited and available to them. And so then we can start measuring adoption rates and success from how fast are you in your velocity and of deploys and things like that. So infrastructure standards are a key to success in the cloud, I think.
Leo, maybe really quick, Leo, to talk a little bit about what you're, or Justin, you want to go?
I want to real quick on that. Just on that point, like it's interesting, like because we're in such a different place, and so like that's like a crawl, walk, run situation. We have 1,000 stacks that are blooming or not blooming, right? And so if you have suburban sprawl to start with, it's like a fairly different situation. So what we're trying to do is funnel based on best of breed in performance. And so we're measuring like it for each of these components. We're saying, hey, we have more ICAM solutions than we have applications at this point. It's out of control, right? And so how do we funnel down to designated enterprise services? And so now we have a 4-component stack that works with our different cloud brokers, and this allows us to do DDIL or just disconnected, and that is our choice unless you can prove a way out of that. And so our integration efforts are focused there. But what we did first was for each of these components, we said, hey, how many are there? 10, 20? No, there's 200. Shit. Okay, from there, what is the cost to value? What is the time to value for each of those? And like you can rank order those. So we're prioritizing. We prioritize based on PAM, privileged access management. We prioritize based on even like at the ubiquitous aspirations for ubiquitous transport. Hey, where is space versus terrestrial? Like what is working? And so as we've narrowed those down, we're approaching the investment horizon funnel for what can scale. And so we've designated 5 enterprise services, and we want winners so that we can get to the situation where Mike is across 300 bases and a lot more commands.
Real quick, Leo, and then maybe Daryl will go over the API stuff you were talking about.
Where to start? Which part do we want to talk about? I think Justin said it perfect, right? We are all at different levels of maturity right now, which has been really interesting. And just looking at this chart, I'm kind of chuckling a little bit because I'm like, oh boy, there's some winners in here, right? That we're struggling with. I think just something to think about. I just want to take it out from the tech piece for a second. What we're finding more and more, right, just across the board, as I look at all of these, is definitely don't have a technology problem. That's not a thing. Right? We've got more technology than we know what to do with right now. I think what we really have right now is kind of the hard work, and that's where we're spending so much time, especially in the Army. Good governance on data. That's really driving this idea of building the right requirement to solve the right problem, with a big focus right now, and I continue to say this everywhere I go, ICAM being the foundation for everything that we do. Right? We can definitely get the capability out there technically, but who operates it? Functionally, how do we get attributes integrated into that technology? If we want to talk about sharing data across services with our foreign partners, right, from federal to state to local, that's the one thing we can't get wrong, right? And that's the area where we're spending a lot of time on kind of flipping the script. I think to Justin's point, right, yeah, 1,000 flowers blooming everywhere. We got good control of that in the Army. The next step is the important step is, how do you get the participants to be active in the journey, right? To make sure that those folks that integrate with state and local, they need attributes, and they have to identify that, right? We can't do that from CIO side. Functionals come in. That's where we're spending a lot of time and effort. And I think just as the public, right, you really want to care about this, right? We talk about challenges that we have and how we use cloud, right? And I know we're going to get into Gen AI and some of the LLM stuff, but just think about this. Right now, there's, I don't know, 90 petabytes of wartime data that's got to get Freedom of Information Act pushed out and declassified. Sounds easy. We have no technology working against that problem right now. It's humans, right? It's a bunch of humans who go through paper and microfiche, believe it or not, that's still a thing, and disks and PDFs to kind of figure out and declass these documents. But to get to the point where we can share them, we got to get these pieces right to make that available to the American public and to make that available to the folks who need it to help kind of reshape policy in this country.
So one of the things we talked about a minute ago is these products have to be shared, right? And so the way that I think modern, cloud native architecture has really driven its value is around the use of APIs. And so maybe Daryl, you could talk a little bit about what you guys are doing in terms of data sharing and like how you're classifying things and how you're making products that you can provide to the rest of the department.
Yeah, so before I go into what we're doing for the next generation, just a little history lesson. So Defense Logistics Agency, while our main business is logistics, from a CIO technical perspective, we're also sought out after at the OSD, Secretary of Defense level for DoD level programs across the department. And so one of those areas that we've been managing for about 60 years now, basically we call it the traffic cop, DAS, Global Exchange, allows for that integration to occur across the department in the areas of finance, HR, procurement, and logistics. And so for about 60 years, we've been responsible for the technical integration across the department for about 9 billion transactions a year. But using a lot of old technology, right? EDI transactions, things of that nature. And so our mission now is how do we sustain that as each of the services and organizations are modernizing, right? You have your new data standards that are coming out, and transitioning that to API gateway so that there's a library of APIs that exists. Everyone's not starting from scratch, right? If I've built an API to LMP, right, the Navy doesn't have to go and rebuild it. The Army can put out a standard that everyone will design to. And so that's part of our new mission in terms of establishing that API gateway. It's not just the technical interchange, but creating that library, but also we're part of managing the standards, data standards across the department. So I think that's another thing that is really limiting our ability to share data and across the main solution, because at one point, right, wrong, and different, we customized a lot of things within the DoD. Now we're trying to be more like industry, using commercial products. And you guys don't call an apple the way we do in the department about 25 times, right? And so we're pushing with OSD to say, hey, let's just create a data standard that industry can help us with, right? You don't have to build a different solution for the Navy, DLA, the Army, et cetera, and we don't have to customize your solution. But let's create the data standard by which that solution will be architected against. And so that's where we've been spending the last 2-3 years, are creating that API gateway to transition between current DAS, what we do there with EDI, with APIs, but then also creating that data standard so that you're working with one Department of Defense and not 6 or 7 different partners.
Yeah, and Mike, really quick, just because you're still in uniform, when you think about like this giant amount of stuff that we're talking about, like Leo said, we have all the technology in the world we need. One of the things that I really love when I listen to like why our military it functions the way it does is because we have the ability of independent people to go and make decisions to achieve their mission. But what you end up with over the 60, 70 years of what we've been looking at is you end up with a lot of missions, doing a lot of things, and then somehow we have to reconcile it all. So can you maybe just talk a little bit from like a commander's perspective of how you look at where I need to standardize, but where I need to be flexible to achieve my mission? Because I think that's going to be really informative to the types of solutions we have to do. Like Daryl was talking about, you have to have those standards. An apple is an apple is an apple. A pair of socks is a pair of socks. But there's going to be differences in how the Air Force versus the Army versus the Navy need to employ that. So could you just talk a little bit like that independence versus the need for standardization?
Yeah, we don't want to slow down the innovation that happens. In the Air Force, we have, I would consider it like a bunch of small businesses with their own IT budgets and their own IT activities that we have to then try to wrangle and focus and deduplicate to synergize. These are a lot of buzzwords, right? But we really do got to focus. We only have so much resources. And when those resources aren't really centralized, they have a lot of autonomy. And there's a few levers we can pull to do that. One of those in my office is the authority to operate. So they all have to come through, at least for Intel, and say, this is what I'm doing, and I would like to get an authority to operate, so I know about them. It's not secret, it's not hidden, and then we can start to connect dots. And how do we look at what is foundational versus what is the unique part they really should be focusing on? And so there is technology foundationally that everyone is very traditionally liking to build from the whole stack, from the bottom up. Remove the dependencies on others, control everything, and if you can afford it, rebuild it. I would rather do that than depend on some external source. And cloud has really turned that upside down. I think the shared responsibility model has to be embraced. And the idea that just because I'm adding more users doesn't mean I'm peanut butter spreading your program to do more with less, but you can actually scale in an as-a-service model elastically with technology and financially with customer funding. And so we look at generally what are these foundational things? Everyone needs identity management. Okay, let's provide that. Everyone needs DNS. Let's provide that. The government has said everyone needs to do vulnerability scanning, antivirus. Let's provide those. Like these are just foundational things that we can do once for many and let them focus on their unique parts. So you can go up the stack as we abstract that and say, you know, I don't want you to build another top secret Kubernetes stack. I already have one of those. Just use this one. And if we don't have something that you need in that stack, like let's not throw away 90% solution to rebuild it. Let's just take the 10% you're saying we're missing and add that, and then let you use the whole 90%. That's the way we're going about this.
Let me just talk specifically around data, because that's a really good question on how we think about data and what it means. Right? And this is really important. There's enterprise data, which tends to not be perishable, tends to be a source of truth, right? Kind of don't muck with that, right? Where ammunition is in a regional area, commanders are probably not going to muck with that, and they want that to be very accurate. Now, at the most local level, maneuvering in the fight, very perishable data, only as good as the second it was collected and delivered, right? And this idea of switching that mindset where you really need to think about what data you have out there from what system is enterprise type data, right? And I use that term very loosely. Or more data that really is inflexible and is probably not going to change and needs to be a source of truth in order to operate. And then what data out there, right? And you got to think about this, right? The challenge for all the services is, and I'll use DoD parlance, echelon, or where you sit across your enterprise. It's going to be a little bit different what that perishability and that maneuverability is of that data. I think that's the hard work right now when we talk about governance. It's not like, hey, we go to meetings and we talk about standards, right? It's more like, hey, we go to meetings and we really understand the data products we need, right? What needs to get minimized, i.e., I don't need every piece of data. I just need this little piece of data to do my mission. And that's where a lot of time is being spent right now. I think the one thing that cloud has let us do, which is really important, is really democratize that data across the board. 5 years ago, even 5 years ago, readiness data for what a unit looked like was not available at an enterprise level. We could not see it, right? It is now, right? Now we can make decisions at scale, and folks who can now help make those decisions have access to that data. That's enterprise data. When we talk about things like JADC2, now we're talking about, I have a bad guy. This is where the bad guy is. That's only as good as the second it was collected. I need to shoot something at that bad guy, right? That's very perishable, and we want commanders to have maximum flexibility with that data right there. So I think that's really important that that's something that we kind of struggle with, and across the services, it's all at different echelonments. So it's really this constant friction that we have and conversation on what data do we really need, what are those products, and what's the one nugget that we need to actually execute a mission. So I think that's something just for everyone to wrap their heads around. We have a couple of parallels. We see it in medical. We see it in some ways in insurance. We definitely see it in law enforcement where we have similar problem sets, but it tends to be a very uniquely military problem set that I think we continue to work through right now.
Yeah, I think echelonment of data is something that's like a really interesting concept, right? I mean, as a logistician, Daryl, do you think that like this type of classification applied across the joint force is going to be necessary? Because just like you supply munitions and food and fuel, data is something that we have to supply, that enterprise, non-perishable data, so that everyone can make decisions, especially when you look at the theater of the Pacific. That's a stretch that we haven't had since World War II. And it's really interesting to think about the speed of light and getting information to like Guam, for example, from the East Coast. It takes a long time, right? So you want to get it out there and available in case you can't do that quickly.
Yeah, and I think that's, for us, the democratization of data is very real. And while we're talking about sharing data amongst ourselves, what we haven't talked about is the need to share data commercially and for a commercial industry to share data with us. And how do you democratize that? How do you put security controls around that? We talk about zero trust, things of that nature. And so that goes right into that decision advantage, right? I think, traditionally it's how did we do? What have we done? What have we learned? I think world events have told us that's not the way to move forward. That's not how you have decision advantage. Decision advantage is what should I do? When should I do it? What conditions will impact it? Things of that nature. And so I don't think there's any one of these models that you're going to choose. We're going to need descriptive at a tactical level. You're going to need some diagnostic, predictive, prescriptive at each level of echelon. But ultimately where you get that advantage is that prescriptive nature. And so for me, the challenge we're having, and I think everyone, right? I use a 4-letter word on stage, CMMC, right? Every vendor in here loves that term. But it's a necessary evil. That's our zero trust model for our commercial partners to say, hey, if you're going to do business with the Department of Defense, we need to make sure you have the right security controls. But our challenge is, how do you make sure it's being maintained, right? How do you get that feedback so that you understand when data's been compromised? And so that's a real focus for us from a logistics community perspective, because DLA cannot be successful without that information. We can't supply anything today, right? We're in a global economy. The US is in competition every day right now, right? There is conflict right now in the logistics community for supplies. And so that data is vital for us to ensure our warfighters have everything they need before they even know they need it, right? COVID was a huge lesson for DLA, right? Everyone, you think you couldn't get toilet paper? We couldn't get toilet paper, right? And we had National Defense Acts and everything behind us, and we were fighting other countries for toilet paper. And so there were indicators from a data perspective months in advance that if we were being more prescriptive in our analytics and the use of our data, we probably could have stemmed the tide a lot better than we did, right? And so that's ultimately, I think, where all of us are trying to get to. It's not being reactive in terms of the service, but giving commanders, giving the warfighter the information so that, hey, 6 months before something occurs, there's a likelihood this could occur. So now you have courses of action you can take, as opposed to, well, the only choice I have is to do this.
And the data that you generate as you go about your job is a signal.
Absolutely.
So keeping that secure is not just about ensuring supply, but it's actually not tipping your hat, right?
I mean, and Leo hit on it. Data acumen, data literacy at the lowest level is vital. One of the things so we get compared to Amazon a lot. But one of the things I noticed in each Amazon distribution center I went to, the person on the dock lifting the boxes, doing the packing and stowing and shipping, they were more excited about the technology than your CIO, because they understood how it would help them be more efficient and effective at their job. If you look at the warfighter over the years, right, how they went into battle, at one point, one person had communications, and you prayed to God it worked. Now, everyone's communicating real time, information coming in through a mini computer on their back to make life or death decisions, right? That's strategic data assets.
So Justin, sorry, did you want to time in there? So we'll move on to talking about data governance and security. I think you hit on zero trust and some other stuff. And I think the Navy's been doing some really interesting things in this space with link speed and other things like that. So can you talk a little bit, when you think about like a data mesh, right? And you think about the ability to interact with these products of information, we're publishing them, we're cataloging them, people know where to go, they know who owns the product, the owner of the product knows who has access to it and what they're going to derive from it so they can still protect their assets. How do you in the Navy view kind of like how to modernize this and how to move quickly, right? And I think flank speed's a good example of that, but do you have any others where you could talk to that?
Yeah, sure. So in general, like I think everyone in this room recognizes that data sharing is 10 times more important and urgent than it was 5 years ago. But not everyone in our enterprise realizes that. And so like what that propagation or what the tail on that is like individual cost benefit analyses. And so like this goes back to the last conversation, but like if we're in a chicken and the egg between data sharing and security, like zero trust, like data level security breaks you out of that, and you can have win-wins if you can prove it. And so like what does that actually look like? A few years ago, there was like an actual policy that said national security data had to be separated, segregated from non-national security data. Like the OGDA undid that because turns out like it's all related to competitive advantage. But like how long does it take to catch up people at 100,000 desks in DC or across the country? Like a long time. And so like you can either have 100 governance discussions, which we've had, or you can bring data, and that expedites number one, the amount that we can leverage other people's stuff, and then two, the way that it propagates through. And so like the people on the stage, like the services in my mind have not been this close since Goldwater Nichols, right? Like our willingness to leverage other people's, when the Air Force said we're gonna take Joint Fires Network into one of our PEOs and everyone's dependent on that, okay. When the Army is taking something, like, okay. And so we're going to be interdependent and we have to. And so the idea of like, obviously, what's common is common, what's unique, unique. Totally agree with Mike, what Mike said. What we're doing at the kind of like component execution level is we're saying, okay, we have a bunch of different data environments. Flank speed is a place that if we do the data very well, we can consolidate some of the other 180 networks into there because data and workflows allow for rationalization, network consolidation, shutting those things down. And then if we're looking at how we use Advana and Jupyter, which is a designated enterprise service, we want more of that. And so if we say, hey, here's how long it takes to convert from S3 through Apogee to an Azure blob, like that process, 17 different artists have done it different ways. Like, let's go with the best one, stop messing around, and then execute that. And that becomes a best practice. And so what does this actually look like? Well, it looks like from a data cleansing perspective, we have bronze, silver, and gold. And when something is gold, whenever something is like actually clean, then we can go across the information domains. Before that, it's not worthy, right? Before that, you can use it for your purposes because you're going to catch it on the translation. Where we can do less manual and more automation there, then we are a better provider back to the enterprise across DoD to share that type of data. That's better for mission partner environments. It's also better for cross-domain cases, where if we're going to actually get after AI, and I have a feeling Leo and some others want to talk about that, like we need data to go across diode or across the domains a lot smoother than it is right now.
Yeah, maybe I just direct a quick question to you, Mike, about partner information sharing with foreign partners, and then we can jump into the AI conversation. So when you think about the joint data sharing problem, like you guys have heard a little bit about how just, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the fourth estate represented by DLA, all are working to share. But, we live in a global community, we work in a global community, the United States has allies, all across the globe. And when we do these types of things, we have to share information with them. But sometimes, there's varying levels of how we interact with people, there's different obligations we have. Sometimes it's not necessarily our information to share. Can you talk a little bit about kind of like, since the Air Force is the executive agent for a lot of the MP stuff, maybe a little bit of the thought of how we're going to do mission partner environments, multinational sharing, and how a lot of what we've talked about today will influence that?
Sure. So mission partner environments, coalition type of information sharing, it's also kind of a question that's time-based. So if you need it like right now, there's what we have now, and then there's what we want to do.
Right.
And so when we think about currently, I have to think about it in a net-centric way, which is going to figure out which coalition set of people or countries are going to be interacting on this specific mission, and then I'm going to redeploy my applications into this other network. I'm going to put endpoints on that network out to those locations, and then I'm going to have probably some cross-domain solution that's going to push a subset of data into that environment to then allow them to communicate with us and each other, and do that over and over again, and in a way that's not realistically scalable, where you have coalitions that are dynamic. This country may pull out of that coalition, and now you've got to undo their access and reconfigure. And on the fly, these things can kick off pretty quickly. And you don't want to not go and incorporate the coalition. Right? Who wants to leave F-35s in Japan on the runway? You've got to have all the capability of all the countries working together, and so it's very, very important. But where we want to go, and that is at an information domain level, the ability to logically separate not by network. And this is central to the whole zero trust and why operationally it's so important. It's not just for security. Now, this is the first time I think that security and operations are actually going to go together. It's not usually, the more secure it is, the less usable it is. Now, I'm actually saying I'm going to have more shareability, more usability of my data, even though it's even more secure. And that's aligned for the first time. And so if instead of having this net-centric view and having 15 logins to do anything, I can actually have one at the same security classification level. Now I can actually start to remove some of those cross-domain solutions. I can actually start separating by logic and keep those things where, with identity management and those attributes that we're looking for, they provide those entitlements. I should be able to have a different user experience where a coalition can actually log into a traditionally no foreign network on a traditionally no foreign application and access only the data that they're allowed to have, and on the fly change it.
Yep.
That's where we want to go, and that's where I'm saying it's a time horizon. Do you need it now? Well, then I got to give it to you like we do. If we can implement some of these key technologies, then we can do this in a wholly different way. That's where we want to be.
Yeah, I think the logical segmentation thing is something that we've been pushing for a long time with the cloud, right? Because the idea of multi-tenancy, you go, Justin, I've been on the Abe Lincoln, and I've seen the 3 racks that are there for coalitions, right? And so I'm paying for 3 sets of infrastructure, and then I have a 4th one come in, and then I have to go put Pelican cases and lash them to the deck, and and that's just for disaster response necessarily. It's not even like a kinetic conflict. That's just, let's go do typhoon relief in the South Pacific, and there's 5 countries that we're working with, and because it's military, it's secret. And so how do we share information in that? Using logical separation is the only way you're going to scale it. Then you think about NATO, 32 countries, you can't have 32 networks and try to do that, right? Because there's just going to be like some guy just moving cables around like an old-timey telephone operator. It's not going to scale. Yeah, you could do it. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So let's move on to, so data is obviously super important in this conversation, but ultimately, what are we going to do with this information? And so I think the advent of AI over the last 7 or 8 years in the department, with like things like there's a lot of different projects that have been going on. But the idea of machine learning, computer vision, those kind of things. But now the generative AI revolution has really started, and kind of bringing that into the department. So maybe I'll start with you, Leo. You could talk a little bit about some projects that you've seen that you're kind of excited about. But I would also ask you, as you're talking about that, what are some of the areas that you still have to evolve around policy, technical blockers, workforce? And I'll extend the question to all of you after Leo, but the good and the bad that we're seeing in terms of like how do we get more velocity to use these tools more effectively?
My most passionate area. So first thing, I will tell you kind of the Army approach initially, and I think most of the services in the Department of Defense is like, hey, we're going to throw this over the fence to all our R&D people, and eventually, they'll figure it out and they'll give us something. Yeah, I said that's not an option. Just do it, right? So we really pushed, and from a CIO perspective, okay, look, we own the network, we own the security posture, we know where the data is, we're just gonna do this. We're gonna make it available to soldiers and to some of our commands against problem sets that make sense, and just operationalize the capability and really understand what we're walking into. And I think that's really important because a lot of the stuff right now is still like, hey, we're going to do this research stuff, which is great. That's a lot of technology. Not finding the challenges there, which is really interesting. We've been working a lot of use cases, probably the easiest ones to work right now, some of our business areas, right? So obviously our legal folks, that's doing great. Our contract folks, especially for LLMs. Some of our mission folks from, just think about this, operationally given orders, being able to see all Army regulations across the board and making that available to folks to understand where maybe there's some friction and where we need some help. We're seeing a lot of work in that space right now. We have a project called Athena that's very much focused on not so much the technology, which is really interesting. We made a fundamental decision to look at a couple of different ways of enabling large language models for customers, right? One I call the hold your hand version. So we have a commercial product that we've made available to folks, and we're kind of doing that in the cloud, kind of raw. Hey, let's just do prompts. They have a certain payment method, which is interesting. We have another one which is just pure cloud native, right? OpenAI has been made available for some of our data at the the CUI level, so not totally classified, but definitely not shareable across to the public. And then we have a couple of other efforts where we're using some system integrators out there to do some customized capabilities for us. And the reason we took that approach and just to operationalize the capabilities across all those different models is to really start understanding what's the business model for, one, how are we going to buy this, right? Which is a really important thing. So if you go across all the cloud providers, they all charge different for how we do this, which is really interesting. The government doesn't do well with different charge models for the same thing. We suck at it really bad, right? So how do we figure out what this looks like, right? The next piece to this is, okay, so we've got a model now, like a business model for how we're going to pay for this. How do we operationalize this and allow folks to get on here in a governed way that makes sense, right? That's really important. It sounds easy for those of us who are nerds and do this all the time. It's really hard when you get the most novice person and put them on one of these platforms and say, hey, go. And I think the other piece to this where we're spending probably most of our time right now is just a better understanding of, at times, just how bad our data is, right? If anything, we're working on building these models, and we've really realized that, hey, that's great that you trained certain model on Reddit. Mildly interesting, doesn't provide any value for any mission we have, not helpful, right? So what does that mean? Now we're really focused on kind of paring that down and being a lot more judicious on how we leverage the technology and building more scoped models that really get at our problem, and we're seeing a lot of success there. I think the last piece to this is understanding from a data perspective, what does that look like? I think the first, one of the first big efforts we had, which I think is pretty funny, is we had 5 different commands across the Army say, hey, we're gonna ingest all contract data that the Army has ever written. That's insanity, but okay, we're gonna bring all these petabytes, we're gonna use all these models, we're gonna get all these answers, it's gonna be great. I was like, we can't afford to do that as an Army, that's not a thing, right? If we have the requirement, then let's get the data centralized, right? Let's make it available clean, right? And let's think about what a model that makes sense for us that we can leverage is. And if we wanna test it against a bunch of different technologies, then go ahead, let's do it, right? Let's bake it off, see what it means. The big thing has been operationalize it now. Don't wait. Don't spend all this time and effort making it a science project. I don't think we need that right now. I think what we really need is to understand, and I use this term very loosely, right? What are the tactics, techniques, and procedures that we're going to do to operationalize this across the board? And that's where their heavy focus is. I think on the industry side where we need help is to really think about the business model here, right? I just talked very vanilla, like we'll deploy in our cloud, right? We'll leverage some SaaS thing. What's really starting to kind of rub against some friction is going to be, I'm delivering this platform to you as a SaaS. It's got an integrated large language model. And I'll give you the example that I use that scares me all the time. We want to use this for recruiting. We want to have an agent that talks to a minor, a US citizen who's a minor. And he asks or she asks an uncomfortable question and gets an answer that causes an effect. Who's liable for that effect? What does that mean? What does that relationship look like? I think that's going to be the next piece that we're really going to have to explore on the policy side, is starting to think about what are these service level agreements that we have with private companies out there? What does this look like, right? Who's liable for actions that are taken and for a conversation that happens? And I'll add with one last piece, because I think it's the really interesting piece that makes me kind of laugh a little bit and where we're learning a lot is, for those who are not in this space and haven't seen the prompts that your customers ask, they are fantastic. I mean, I have seen all kinds of crazy ones, which I will not say out loud, but they're pretty funny, right? And believe it or not, the guardrails work. On most of the stuff out there, the guardrails do work. But we're finding that that's driving a redefinition of like, hey, where is this technology best suited? And that's the place that I keep telling folks, focus on that. Every problem is not an AI problem or an ML problem or a large language model problem, right? So a lot of work into triaging that and focusing on where we can give the most lift. But one last little piece is definitely it is about lift for humans, right? Where do you operationalize the capability where we get maximum results? And what that really means is, and again, everybody in DoD and in the just in the government in general, we always say things in terms of efficiency, which I think is a pretty funny word, because efficiency with terrible effectiveness is useless, right? And it's not good taxpayer money use. We've been really focused on, very important piece, how does this get us more effective in the job that we're doing? I think that's been the key, and that's where really we've been pushing hard right now.
So, AI is kind of a wildfire. All the applications out there somehow are seeming to integrate AI into them. So whether we are bringing it ourselves or we just have an update to some application we already own, it's kind of coming, and we have to kind of realize this is now a standard way of life for all of us to have this pretty much embedded all over the place. We have a group that was like a center of excellence for AI. Has a Star Wars theme, Red Force, but it really has some great government leadership that is also supported by contractors, some really great SMEs. And we've been able to use Amazon SageMaker and embed this at Unclassed Secret NTS at all three in parity on top of our DevOps platform. So they have an MLOps capability. And this team triage, basically someone comes and says, I need some AI sprinkled on this thing. We're like, really, do you? Like maybe it's just automation, like you said. And there's really great benefits that you can get from automating. But if really AI may be able to be the solution for that, then we have a marketplace in this central group that is aggregating all the what things have we built already and what things have we bought already that you could try to run your use case against, bring your own data, see how it performs, and then if it does perform for you, we don't have to build something again. And let's just look at how we can integrate that into your workflow. And so it's not a one-off over here thing that you have to deal with, it's just part of your workflow. And that. So they help with that kind of streamlining of the activities. When we do actually need to bring something new in, we can look at how do we do that responsibly? How do we do that securely? And then what are the limits on what use cases is this applicable for? In the Air Force, we look a lot at computer vision because that's where a lot of our sensors are, right? So overhead kind of imagery, full motion video. We're very partnered with NGA in these kinds of activities where I'm a co-lead for the GeoInt Data and AI subcommittee there. And we're doing things like how do we measure confidence in a standard way that everyone will agree this metric means something. And when I'm passing you the metadata, I'm getting the ellipse, not just the dot. What is the error? So that I can overlap ellipses and get to better standards of confidence and understanding. So we're passing those specific metadata fields now as a standard in these activities. So there's sharing going on across the ecosystem of activities, and we want to federate our marketplace as well with the other marketplaces that are out there so that we can then just grow what do we already have. And so that's one of our major focal points. From a generative LLM type use case, I would say, again, when you talk about Intel, you don't want things making stuff up. So it's very like use case dependent. I would say things that maybe the one I just worked on is a great use case where our senior leader was like, I want to take all the briefs and memos and things that I've gotten in my tenure here and make that for my successor who's coming in something that they can summarize and they can do inferences on and they can understand, so I can have my own workbook with my own stuff, and then I can transfer that over as a continuity book that's actually able to be interacted with. That's a great use case, I think, and so we can do that. Cool.
Yeah, I think for us, when we talk about Gen AI, our big use cases are really demand planning, forecasting, looking at supply chain disruption. But in terms of AI, I think for us, we took our foray into what we felt was a pretty standardized data set, procurement. So we've done a lot of things from that perspective in terms of we do about 10,000 automated orders per day at DLA. And so in support of that, we've created some AI models to say, hey, if we're going to put a solicitation out, what's the likelihood we're going to get a no bid, which adds to procurement time, right, and lead times. So we've done that. We've done some things to flag bad actors, potential bad actors from a supply chain perspective with AI modeling moving forward. But I think the key too is what Leo pointed out in terms of every case is not an AI case. Every case is not a Gen AI case, right? A lot of cases we get people just want automation, but they'll just say, but someone told me I need Gen AI, so give me Gen AI, right? And so we've really modeled around what problem are you solving for? What answer are you looking for? And then let's figure out how we want to utilize the data, right? It may be AI, it may be Gen AI, it may be something else. Having a center of excellence, I think, works from a department perspective just to have a focal point for AI use cases. But I think also for us, and I'll speak from a DLA perspective, the hard part is culturally getting the organization to embrace AI. Because if you're not a technical person, the first thing people say when they hear AI, how many people are you looking to cut? Right? You're doing AI for the purpose of getting rid of jobs, and we really looked at it as a force multiplier at DLA. Right? It really is. We're not going to get rid of people. I don't think there's anyone on this stage that's looking for work. Right? Anyone in the audience that's looking for work, that because you put AI in there, you're going to get rid of people. You're now going to start getting after things you haven't been able to get to for the past 5 to 10 years that are vital to the mission as well. And so that's the approach we're taking at DLA is, what problem are you solving? Is it truly an AI problem? And if it is, what type of AI do you want to apply?
Yep. If our any projects that are AI projects that are not targeted at outcomes, that money is going to dry up. Like even if we succeeded, we got money for that is gone in a year. It's small money. O&M lasting money is if you can prove the business case. We lock our budget 3 years in advance for the most part. And so you're either divesting something or changing streams, or you asked for it before generative AI was popular. So the success cases we have, our Horizon 1 cases to date, are mostly ML. We have Harbinger that's doing acoustics. This is on multiple vehicles. This is saving man hours. It's adding to resilience. It's adding to time saved. It's a huge impact, and it's changing the way that we work. For cyber, we now have 8-digit events per day, cyber events per day, and we can handle that with a 1-digit watch floor because of those are positions that we probably couldn't have hired for anyway, but we solved that, and then we can either reduce licenses, which we've done, and turn that divestment. In terms of, like, there are a lot of cases like that from an ML and then even computer vision perspective with Maven. Every time I go to CENTCOM or one of the combatant commands, I get fired up. From a Horizon 2 perspective, like let's figure out what we can do and where this can go. We have some RAG use cases, but until they can show that business case or, hey, this did my report a little bit faster. Well, okay, if you get like a longer smoke break, we're probably not going to scale that. Like, what does this actually look like in execution where you're saving real time and executing? And so, like, as the Horizon 2 and even Horizon 3, like public partnerships stuff, gets more mature, we will evaluate all of those based on outcomes and where the money is coming from. That's the unlock for the Innovation Adoption Kit for how do we get those to scale. So we have 251 AI projects right now. the ones that actually make it over the valley of death are going to be prioritized based on impact. And then from a workforce perspective, with 30 seconds left, the idea here is I think it's easier to train us and educate us as data-driven decision makers than data experts. And so if you are industry folks who are working with the government, feel free to send us free courses, but if you're thinking about like the hundreds of thousands of people, if you can arm us with better data-driven decisions, then we can make better decisions, and don't make it close.
Well, I mean, that's boom, 1 second. So there it is. So want to thank everybody for attending today. I think this is a really important topic. I really appreciate, I think it was Leo who made the comment, like, you need to care about this. For those of you in the room that work with the department, obviously we're here to support the mission. For those of you who are out of curiosity, like, this is a really important topic, right? And so what you can do, even in your spare time, contributing to open source projects, volunteering, whatever, like, look at all levels of government, not just federal and defense, but anywhere we can help drive this, right? Because this is how our country is going to get more efficient, more effective, deliver better citizen services. So really appreciate the time. Our speakers, a couple of them do have to run to other engagements after this, but if you would be so kind as to do the survey in the mobile app, and then on the public sector pavilion, there are some AI and data demos that we have this year that are loosely based on some of the things the team here has talked about. So please do go check those out. But again, thank you so much for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of the week.